introduction. All that was necessary, that I am a contributor to your NJA, that should have been enough. But I'm grateful for the introduction. Welcome all of you, and good morning to all of you. Today we have a subject to discuss, which we have been actually relying upon since the time we were students of law. Because we all believe that law is logic. And looking at the acts, the legislations, we sometimes get very overwhelmed without realizing that there are acts which actually speak what is called common sense. And for me, the General Clauses Act is an act of common sense. Let us start with the historical background. The General Clauses Act is what is known as an interpretation act. All of you are aware what is interpretation. When we are reading a law or any matter related to law, the first thing that comes in our mind is how are we going to interpret a particular section or a rule. And that is where interpretation steps in. The General Clauses Act lays down the basic rules for interpretation of the provisions of an Act of Parliament. It also defines certain words or expressions so that there is no unnecessary repetition of the definition of those words in other acts. The first such act was the Interpretation Act of 1850. Now, we are all common law countries, and as far as we all remember, the first of the legislations started coming in from the United Kingdom. This Interpretation Act of 1850 was also popularly known as Lord Brougham's Act. Interestingly, our first act of 1868 was based on this act. We'll come to that a little later. We also note that this act, known as the Lord Brougham's Act, devised the system of dividing legislations into sections and made provisions for interpreting other statutes. This act was repealed by the Interpretation Act of 1889 in the United Kingdom, which has become the mother of many interpretation statutes in Commonwealth countries. Coming back to the brief history of our Act of 1887. The first Indian enactment on this subject was the General Clauses Act of 1868, which, as I mentioned earlier, referred to the 1850 Act of the United Kingdom. The second act was the General Clauses Act of 1887. The present act is of 1897. That basically consolidated and extended the Indian law of general clauses. So that is the brief historical background to our General Clauses Act of 1897. The history is always important because then we know where to go back in case of difficulty. This is not a session on interpretation of statutes. Otherwise, we would have gone on what kind of sources of interpretation we can use. Maybe Dr. Yellagada could arrange a session later for that, or maybe it is already arranged for.
Sure, my lord.
Now, let us understand what is the purpose of such an enactment. As we see from the title, it is a consolidating and amending act. As per the statement of objects and reasons, now every act, since we have students who have recently passed out, it is important to understand that every act, every legislation has a statement of object and reason. Now, why do we have statement of object and reason? It brings out the purpose of an enactment. What is the purpose we need this particular act? Why did we need the Partnership Act? Why did we need the Specific Relief Act? Why do we need the Income Tax Act? And so on and so forth. So the purpose is brought out by the statement of objects and reasons. So what is the statement of objects and reasons of the General Clauses Act of 1897? It says that this act does not propose to effect any change in the law. So this is not an act which actually brings out some kind of change of law to the existing enactments. Its object, like that of the acts it consolidates, is to shorten the language of statutory enactments and to provide for uniformity of expression in cases where there is identity of subject matter. So what are we talking about? What is this uniformity of expression? Why do we need uniformity if there is a different purpose for different acts? What is the identity of subject matter? But you'll be surprised. And in fact, I was elated when the first time this act came my way. Simple, common expressions like what is the definition of a month? Now we have a problem which Dr. Yerlagada may have shared with you, or he may be about to share with you. This is subject matter of a lot of judicial interpretation. Every student of law may think, what is there in a month? Either it has 30 days or it has 31 days, or if it's February, it has 28 days, or if it's a leap year, it has 29 days. What is the whole thing? But then you'll be surprised that unless and until we have these definitions somewhere, it can create havoc in interpreting law and also in eventually dispensing justice. Because justice is not only supposed to be done, it should also be seen to be done. And that is where the whole role of the General Clauses Act comes in. Coming back to the purpose of the General Clauses Act. To place in one single statute different provisions as regards interpretation of words and legal principles which would otherwise have to be specified separately in many different acts and regulations. Simple, common day usage words, common day concepts cannot be every now and then incorporated in every legislation that we come out with. And therefore, the General Clauses Act plays an important role. We will see in a short while how. So what are the objects of this act now? As you can see on your screen, to shorten the language of statutory enactments, to provide as far as possible for uniformity of expression, giving prima facie definitions of a series of terms in common use, to state explicitly common rules of construction, and to guard against slips and oversights by incorporating by implication into every act certain standard clauses which otherwise would have to be inserted expressly and which might otherwise have been overlooked. Definitions and rules of interpretation contained in this act have to be read in every other statute governed by the act, provided the statute does not contain anything repugnant to them in the subject or context, or does not exhibit a different intention. Now, as students of law, you may have studied at least 10 to 12 acts till the time you passed out. Most of the acts would have certain sections which will define certain things. Now, the beauty of the General Clauses Act is it does not take away a definition which is there in a statute. All it says is that if the context otherwise requires, then you will refer to the statute. And if it is not provided in that statute, then by necessary implication, the definition that is given, the rules of construction that are given, will be as per the General Clauses Act. That is what this simply means. Now, let us see what the Honorable Supreme Court had to say on the purpose of the General Clauses Act. This is an old case of Thapar. The Supreme Court held that the purpose of this act is to place in one single statute different provisions as regards interpretation of words and legal principles which would otherwise have to be specified separately in many different acts and regulations. Whatever the General Clauses Act says, whether as regards the meanings or words or as regards legal principles, has to be read into every statute to which it applies. Just in a moment, we will see where does this act apply. One more interesting thing which you people should make a note is Article 367 of the Constitution. Article 367 of the Constitution clearly stipulates that the General Clauses Act applies to the Constitution as well. Look at the beauty of our Constitution. It has taken care of everything that happened before India became a dominion, everything till it became an independent nation or a republic, or when the Constitution of India was brought into effect, and everything that happens after the Constitution of India comes in. That is taken care of by our Constitution. And our Constitution very specifically refers to the General Clauses Act and its applicability, even for interpreting the Constitution. So this is, I would say, something like an icing on the cake. And therefore, I consider the General Clauses Act to be an icing on the cake of other statutes of our country. Because the Constitution of our country specifically gives it that primary importance. And we should not forget that. Of course, it says subject to Article 372, but then that is another matter. That is regards amendments, etc. Having come so far on the purpose of the Act, let us try to appreciate where does this Act apply. Can we go to the next slide? Let us see. What is the application of this Act? These are central acts to which the General Clauses Act applies. Acts of the Indian Parliament, acts of the Dominion Legislature passed between 15th August 1947 and 26th January 1950, acts passed before the commencement of the Constitution by the Governor General in Council or the Governor General acting in legislative capacity. Now, there is no territorial extent clause in the General Clauses Act. Most of the statutes in our country will say it applies to the whole of India except to the state of Jammu and Kashmir earlier on. Now, no longer. But earlier on, it used to be like that. So territories were defined. So this act does not have any territorial extent. Its application is primarily with reference to central acts or regulations and not with reference to the territory itself. It is in a sense part of every central act or regulation. Now, we are in the state of Maharashtra, and you will be wondering whether this act applies to the state of Maharashtra or not. Interestingly, all the states have their own General Clauses Act, most of the states. And we have, earlier it used to be called the Bombay General Clauses Act, now it is called the Maharashtra General Clauses Act 1904. Most of the clauses in the central statute, the Central General Clauses Act, have been reproduced in the Maharashtra General Clauses Act 1904. So more or less, we don't have to worry. There are certain specific differences, but that is since we are on the salient features of the General Clauses Act, we may not refer to it right now. So coming back to the application of the General Clauses Act is not territorial. There is no territorial compass, and it applies to all the acts in the country. And for state, we have the Maharashtra General Clauses Act 1904. Now, what is the broad structure of this act? This act has 30 sections. Not a very large act like Income Tax Act or the Insolvency Act, because as commerce has grown, there has been a need to spell out everything in the statute, and rightly so. But common sense doesn't have to be really in large codes. Common sense can be codified in 30 sections. So let us see what this classification is in this General Clauses Act. Sections 3 to 4A, they contain general definitions. Then you have sections 5 to 13A, which refer to general rules of construction. Then we have powers and functionaries, sections 14 to 19. Provisions as to orders, rules made thereunder are 20 to 24. And we have certain miscellaneous provisions, like all other acts, in sections 25 to 30. Let's start with the section on general definitions, because that is the section we will use most often. Section 3 defines 66 phrases, which are commonly used in various statutes. In fact, it is like a dictionary. As students of English or any other language, we keep using the dictionary. We also have a legal dictionary, the Black's Law Dictionary, etc. This is a codified dictionary, let us put it that way. So, of terms which are often used in various enactments and not necessarily defined. However, these definitions are not meant to give a hidebound meaning to the terms. And therefore, as we have just discussed earlier, it always says unless there is anything repugnant in the context. So there is always a saving. This act is not going to impinge on how other acts function. But if those acts don't have any definition, they can always take support of it. Just like the Maharashtra Judicial Academy. We as judges of the High Court or judges in various districts, we do our judicial duties. But when there is some research work to be done, some support to be taken, we refer to Dr. Yarlagadda. So like that, we have the General Clauses Act. Yeah. You'll be surprised actually that there are definitions like month, year, and even India is defined. Even India is defined in the Act. People say, what's the big deal? Why should India be defined? But India also has to be defined because we had British India and we have India after independence. So India also is defined there. We may take a look at it if we have the General Clauses Act. Interestingly, this definition is in clause 28, India. India shall mean as respects any period before the establishment of the Dominion of India, British India, together with all territories of Indian rulers, then under the suzerainty of His Majesty, all territories under the suzerainty of such an Indian ruler and the tribal areas, as respects any period after the establishment of the Dominion of India and before the commencement of the Constitution, all territories for the time being included in that Dominion, and as respects any period after the commencement of the Constitution, all territories for the time being comprised in the territory of India. So just see how India has been defined. Then there is definition of Indian law in clause 29. There is definition of Indian state in clause 30. There is local authority. There is definition of magistrate. So all these things are defined, things which are terms or words which are commonly used in various acts, whether they are local acts or whether they are central acts, are available in the General Clauses Act of 1897. Let us go further and try to appreciate what the Supreme Court has to say as far as Section 3 is concerned. This is the case of Dilip Kumar and Company. Now, this is a constitutional bench decision where the Honorable Supreme Court and legal advisors, we need to appreciate that General Clauses Act is something which will assist all of us, and we need to appreciate how a regulation or a central act comes into force. It comes into force upon the expiration of the day preceding its commencement. Now, this rule applies to a central act or an act of the legislature or a regulation. In the case of G.S. Chhata Rice Mills, the Supreme Court, for the first time, had the occasion to consider the starting point for the enforceability of notifications which were published electronically. Now, we'll just come back to our slide presentation where the findings of the Supreme Court have been set out, where it says that the notification is neither a central act nor it is a regulation, and therefore the General Clauses Act will not apply. But if the General Clauses Act doesn't apply, what is to be done? And that was what was discussed in the case of G.S. Chhata Rice Mills. We will come back to that case a little later. That case had its origin in the Pulwama attack that had taken place earlier, and because of which this was the Pulwama attack on 14 February 2019, after which the Union government had issued notifications on 16 February, under which an enhanced customs duty of 200% was imposed on all goods which came into India from Pakistan. And that is the context of this whole discussion as to whether the General Clauses Act will apply to this notification. There were people who had already brought into India their goods, and there were people who had not yet brought it to India. So the point was, what was that cutoff time? What was the cutoff time after which they would have had to pay 200% duty? And who would not have to pay that? So the Supreme Court had the occasion to consider that And in that context, there was a discussion on the General Clauses Act and as to how an electronically published notification was to be interpreted. We'll come back to that case a little later. Let us first complete our discussion on the salient features of this act. So as we have seen, the Supreme Court had the occasion to deal with the definition of Central Act and the definition of regulation to come to a conclusion that a notification issued under Section 8A does not fulfill the definition of regulation under the General Clauses Act. It does not fulfill the definition of a Central Act under the General Clauses Act. So that was the purpose of bringing out this particular case, and therefore the court held that Section 5(3) of the General Clauses Act would not apply in this case. I did not want to bring out a case which said the General Clauses Act doesn't apply, but since it is already part of the slide presentation, so be it. But we'll discuss this case later because I'm sure all of you would be curious to know what did the Supreme Court do and how did it do. So if we have little time at the end, we will discuss it because this was the first ever case where an electronically uploaded Gazette notification was interpreted, its enforceability was interpreted by the Supreme Court. Let's come to the case of common cause. The Supreme Court in the case of common cause has held that Section 5 has no application when the Act provides that it will come into force on a date to be notified by the central government. That we just discussed some time back. Various statutes contain those provisions in the opening part of the statutes. What are then the general rules of construction as far as repeals are concerned? When a repeal takes place. Now, what is a repeal? What is a repeal? A repeal is something when an existing statute is replaced by another statute. An older statute gives way to a new statute in view of the various developments which take place in the society. And that is something. And there are new acts which are coming every day, trying to protect civil liberties and so that citizens can enforce their rights better. We have the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which was not there earlier. It has replaced several other laws. So new legislation keeps coming in. So what happens to actions that were done or judicial decisions or any orders that were passed, forfeitures, punishments, etc., done under the earlier acts? That is where the general rules of construction come into play. In fact, if you have even read one act, at the end we have repeal provisions, we have transitory provisions. They also deal with this situation. But if that situation is not covered, where does one go? What is that interpretation? What will happen to a case where a punishment has been provided and somebody has already been sentenced and a new act has come in and the proceedings are still pending in the court? Which law will apply? The old law or the new law? How does it work? Can a citizen take advantage of the new law? All these questions will certainly arise in the minds of students as well as the other participants. Let us see what does Section 6 of the General Clauses Act say. This is effect of repeal. Where this act or any central act or regulation made after the commencement of this act repeals any enactment hitherto made or hereafter to be made, then unless a different intention appears, the repeal shall not. What will it not do? Revive anything not in force or existing at a time at which the repeal takes effect. So it will not revive anything. It just dies. Affect the previous operation of any enactment so repealed or anything duly done or suffered, or affect any right, privilege, obligation, or liability acquired, accrued, or incurred under any enactment. Affect any penalty, forfeiture, punishment. Affect any investigation, legal proceeding, or remedy in respect of any such right, privilege, obligation, liability, penalty. This is an interesting point for the newly appointed JMFCs or the newly qualified lawyers. Matters are pending in courts, acts keep changing, new acts keep coming in. We need to refer to which one? The new act or the old act? This is where General Clauses Act comes into play. If any action, any penalty, any investigation, any legal proceeding that is pending on the date on which the act has been repealed, the repeal would not have any effect on it, which means the litigation or the court proceeding will continue as if it was under the earlier law. And that will ensure discipline and certainty to the litigants. And that is the purpose, also one of the purposes of the General Clauses Act. Any such investigation, legal proceeding, or remedy may be instituted or continued or enforced, and any such penalty, forfeiture, or punishment may be imposed as if the repealing act or regulation had not been passed. Now, there is an interesting case. I will skip 2 slides and come to the interesting case of Hindustan Unilever, which is on the point. This is a recent decision of the Supreme Court. This was a case where the appellant was charged for violation under the provisions of the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act. Now, this was an act of 1954, and if anybody was found to have violated this act, such violation attracted a sentence of not less than 6 months up to 3 years and a fine of ₹1,000. The act was repealed, and the new act called the Food Safety and Standards Act of 2006 came into force on 28th of August 2006. Now, this act contemplated only imposition of fine and no prosecution or punishment in jail, no imprisonment. Now, what the appellant did, they tried to take advantage of the new act. The appellant said, look, this act has come into force on 28th of August, and therefore we are entitled to claim benefit of this act because the earlier act stands repealed. What did the Supreme Court say? The Supreme Court, after examining both the repeal and saving clauses, Yeah, just one moment. I am getting my person to put that slide. Come later on. later on. I have just skipped 2 slides. I have skipped 2 slides, come later on. Yes, this is it. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sorry. The Supreme Court examined both the repeal and saving clause contained in Section 97 of the Food Safety Act and Section 6 of the General Clauses Act. Unless a different intention appears, the repeal of a statute does not affect any investigation, legal proceeding, or remedy in respect of any such right, privilege, obligation, liability, penalty, forfeiture, or punishment, and any such investigation, legal proceeding, or remedy may be instituted, continued, or enforced, and any such penalty, forfeiture, or punishment may be imposed as if the repealing act or regulation had not been passed. So what did the Supreme Court do? It protected the action that was taken by the authorities prior to the repeal and prior to the enactment of the 2006 legislation. In the 2006 Act, the repeal and saving clause also contained Section 97(1), and it specifically provided that the repeal of the Act shall not affect any investigation or remedy in respect of any such penalty, forfeiture, or punishment, and the punishment may be imposed as if the 2006 Act had not been passed. So that is how the Supreme Court, in the case of Hindustan Unilever, it is a very recent decision, as you will see. Go to the earlier slide. As you will see in the citation provided, it's a 2020 decision. And this is how the Supreme Court has interpreted a repeal and saving provision of a new act, and how an advantage was sought to be taken, but that was not permitted by the Supreme Court in view of the General Clause, Section 6 of the General Clauses Act, and also the repeal provision and saving provision contained in the Food Safety Act of 2006 itself. So that is how Section 6 has been interpreted. Just coming back to the slides where there is a discussion of the case of State of Punjab versus Mohar Singh. The Supreme Court has held that wherever there is a repeal of an enactment, the consequences laid down in Section 6 of the General Clauses Act will follow, unless the section itself says something else or a different intention appears. There are also certain temporary statutes where the operation is limited. So there Section 6 cannot be invoked. Of course, if that temporary statute is repealed before, then again Section 6 will come into play. But if it is a short duration statute, then Section 6 will not apply. Let's come further down to Section 6A, which provides that the repeal of an amending act would not undo the textual amendments they had effected. Then Section 7, it speaks of revival of a repealed act. What happens if some act which has been repealed has been revived? It says, in any central act or regulation made after the commencement of this act, it shall be necessary for the purpose of reviving either wholly or partially any enactment wholly or partially repealed to expressly state that purpose. Therefore, in order to revive a repealed statute, it is necessary to state an intention to do so. If it is not so stated, then it will be understood that it was not the intention to revive it. And it may be treated as another statute, as a new statute. Now, Section 8 is an important provision which we all come across in our day-to-day work. It is the cross-referencing in other acts. It says where an earlier statute is repealed and reenacted, it is the reenacted provision that will take the place of corresponding provision in the repealed enactment, insofar as its incorporation by reference in other statutes is concerned. Now we have seen we had the earlier Limitation Act of 1908 that was replaced by the Limitation Act of 1963. So all references in any act to the Limitation Act of 1908 must be construed as references to the Limitation Act of 1963. So we don't have to, if there is a repeal, then the reference will be to the other act. Then, so that is as far as, and this is a very important provision, Section 8, because these are not provided specifically in any of the statutes. Now we come to something more commonsensical. Section 9. How do we count limitation? As judges, as well as lawyers, as well as students of law, we always come across pleadings, proceedings, which may not have been filed in time. Though the remedy may be there elsewhere, but though the right may be there, but because of limitation, the remedy may be lost. Now, why there should be a limitation, that is not a subject matter of today's discussion. But suffice it to say that both sides should have notice to the extent of which they could be held liable, and therefore we have the law of limitation, that is something which is based on justice, equity, and good conscience. And that is the basis on which most of our statutes are made. So how do we calculate the number of days? In any central act, regulation made after the commencement of this act, it shall be sufficient for the purpose of excluding the first in a series of days or any other period of time to use the word wrong, and for the purpose of including the last in a series of days or any other day or any other period of time to use the word to. Now in abstract, this really sounds so complicated because it is stating the obvious. It is stating the obvious. To state the obvious is very confusing. And therefore, this would also look confusing. If we have had a chance to look at the problem that may have been circulated by Dr. Yarlagadda, it will be very helpful to appreciate this point. So when a particular statement says that from the date of receipt of the order, what does it mean? If we have received a particular order, let's say on the 30th of August 2019, as we have set out in the problem which may have been handed over to you. that date needs to be excluded. If any act says from the receipt of the date of the order, that particular day of receipt would be excluded in accordance with section 9. That is what it says. The first in a series of days or any other period of time to use the word from, so that from goes out. That is what section 9 says. And for the purpose of including the last day in a series of days or any other day, the period of time to use the word to. So if we say, if it was from, let's say, 30th of August 2019 to the 31st to the 30th of November to the 30th of November, then that 2 would include the 30th of November. So exclude the first day and include the last day. That's the short of it, long and short of it. That's the principle we must always remember, because not only as a lawyer I experienced, even sitting this side as a judge, we see how number of days in condonation of delay applications are not properly calculated, because this understanding doesn't seem to have been perpetuated. Dr. Yellagada, I think we should focus on this part in our other sessions also.
Yes, my lord. Yes.
How to calculate number of days.
Yes, sir.
This is something you will also find across. Sometimes they will say 298 days. Then again it will be scratched out and written as 299 days, because the from and to has gone haywire. So this is something, if at the earliest we learn, the better it is.
Yes, my lord.
So that's as far as section 9(1) is concerned. And the problem that Dr. Yerlagarda would have circulated, you can take a look at it before you send in your views to him.
It is shared, my lord, to the on email as well as the WhatsApp.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Yerlagarda. Now let's come to computation of time. This is also very interesting. Section 10. It says, whereby any central act or regulation made after the commencement of this act, any act or proceeding is directed or allowed to be done or taken in any court of or office on a certain day or within a prescribed period, then if the court or office is closed on that day or the last day of the prescribed period, the act or proceeding shall be considered done or taken in due time if it is done or taken on the next day afterwards on which the court or office is open. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? This means, as has been indicated in the case study problem, if Sunday is a public holiday and the last day on which you can file your proceeding or appeal is a public holiday or the court office is closed, the language is not that it should be a public holiday. The language is that the court or office on a certain day is closed on that day, if it is closed for whatever reason. Now, we normally take public holidays as days on which courts are closed or offices which are to receive certain documents are closed. Then what will happen? Because the rights of a citizen are about to be extinct. The remedy, I stand corrected, the remedy of the citizen is about to be extinguished. And that needs to be really taken care of. So just to protect that, the General Clauses Act says, all right, if you do it on the next day, that should be all right. a next working day. That should be all right. That is the meaning of this section 10. Though a plain reading may again lead to some kind of confusion and anxiety. What does this complicated language mean? But the framers of this act were very wise. They had great foresight and vision. What is going to happen in the future, in the next 100, 200, 300 years? So keeping all that in mind, they have taken pains to draft it in such a way that there is no misunderstanding or misinterpretation. And therefore, it is worded like this. But it simply means that if the day on which a court or an office is closed, then it is all right if you have done the filing on the next working day. And that would be treated as if it was done within time. That is all that it means. So that is section 10. Now, there is some judicial exposition on section 10. This is a case of Harinder Singh versus Karnail Singh. The Supreme Court said, broadly stated, the object of the section is to enable a person to do what he could have done on a holiday on the next working day. So simply, the Supreme Court puts it. When you read these decisions, you want to read them again and again because it's been put so simply. Where therefore, a period is prescribed for the performance of an act in a court or office, and the period expires on a holiday, then according to the section, the act should be considered to have been done within that period if it is done on the next day on which the court or office is open. For that section to apply, therefore, all that is requisite is that there should be a period prescribed and that period should expire on a holiday. That is all. There are expiry periods, 30 days, months. So that is where we need to take recourse to section 10 and this beautiful way in which this whole section has been summarized by the Supreme Court is worth remembering. For this section to apply, all that is requisite is that there should be a period prescribed and that period should expire on a holiday. In Hukumdev Narayan Yadav's case, the Supreme Court said, a court cannot be said to be closed if the office is open to entertain appeals and applications, even though the judges of the court are not sitting. That happens very often in our courts. We have working Saturdays, we have non-working Saturdays. So we have to take into consideration those aspects as well. If there are working Saturdays where court offices are working, then that would not, and if no filing has been done on that day, that would not help the litigant or the lawyer to show that he can file it on the next working day. If it is a closed Saturday, I believe even Saturdays are, the offices are closed, and odd Saturdays the offices work. So that will have to be kept in mind. Now, having said so, as far as section 9 and 10 are concerned, we will move a little quickly on the balance part of the General Clauses Act. We come to section 11, which refers to distances, measurement of distances. Now, just see how many years back they thought of even codifying how distances will be measured. Although it's commonsensical, but then it is still there as a code. Distance to be measured in a straight line on a horizontal plane, unless a different intention appears. So this is quite wonderful. The more I have been reading this act, I feel this is really like a Bible for interpreting all the statutes. Duty to be taken pro rata in enactments. That is section 12. Then we have something on gender. Now, just that everyone is included. Section 13 clearly says that the masculine gender shall be taken to include females. Excuse me. For example, the words his father and mother have been construed to include her father and mother. And this is the case of Madhukeshwar, a Supreme Court case. Words in singular shall include plural and vice versa. Word machine in an exemption notification under Section 25 of the Customs Act was interpreted to include machines. Now, these are things which most of us would think is common sense. Why do we really need to codify it? But as you will grow in the legal system and the judicial system, you will realize that every word is important. And therefore, we have the General Clauses Act. You cannot say it is understood. You have to make it to be understood based on the statute or on the basis of case law. You cannot simply say it is understood. So when you advance arguments in a court of law, don't simply say it is understood. It is common sense, because common sense has also been codified. We are a country which works under the Constitution, and laws are made under the Constitution, and therefore we have to refer to statute law. Then we come to the powers and functionary. Interestingly, these are sections 14 to 19. Sections 14 to 19 are important. I'm not sure if at this stage you would be able to appreciate these things, but suffice it to say that in many legal proceedings, the issues arise, especially in service law matters, when people are suspended or they are removed from service. The question always arises whether the authority doing so had the power to do so. Interestingly, section 16 refers to power to appoint. It says power to appoint includes power to suspend, remove, or terminate. Now, this also may sound very obvious, that a person who appoints you, by very nature of such a power, can also remove you. Yes. So, as we have discussed earlier, we are stating the obvious, but this issue has perhaps been subject matter of a huge or a large number of litigations that are pending in this country. Whether there was power with the authority to suspend or to remove. So, therefore, section 16 is very important, though it states the obvious. Section 14 refers to the power to appoint, includes power to appoint ex officio. Now, that is also something which you will encounter in your practice, ex officio positions, etc. Whether the authority had power to appoint official positions or even ex officio. So again, the same thing as we discussed earlier. Now, construction of orders, etc. issued under the enactments. This is section 20. Expressions used in a notification, order, scheme, rule, form, or bylaw shall, unless there is anything repugnant in the subject or context, have the same respective meanings as in the act or regulation conferring the power to issue the notification, order, scheme, rule, form, bylaw. Now, this is part of administrative law that when there is an act or a statute, and in that act or statute you have power to make rules, and under the rules you can also come out with notifications, schemes, orders. So this brings in harmony, that everything that is, every language, every term that would be used in an order, scheme, or a rule would be the same as is there in the enactment. That is what section 20 says. Power to issue to include power to amend, vary, or rescind. The same way, like we have power to appoint, here we have power to issue a notification. Whichever authority has the power to issue that would also have the power to amend it. So this discusses the source of that power. And that is also the reason the General Clauses Act is a very important piece of legislation. It's actually a must legislation for every lawyer to read and to understand and to keep reading and understanding. Making of rules or bylaws and issuing of orders between passing and commencement of enactment, that is section 22. It validates rules, bylaws, and orders before the commencement of the enactment in anticipation of it coming into force, provided they are made after its passing. Then we have section 23, provisions applicable to making of rules or bylaws after previous publication, continuation of orders, etc., issued under enactments, that is section 24. We have section 25, very interesting actually, which refers to, as you can see from the slide, this refers to a double jeopardy situation, where an act or omission constitutes an offence under 2 or more enactments. The offender shall be prosecuted and punished under either or any of those enactments, but shall not be liable to be punished twice for the same offence. Now, this is keeping in mind Article 20 of the Constitution of India. Very important. People will say, is it not understood? And that is the whole thing. Everything that is understood is there in the General Clauses Act. Then we come to a more important section, or rather a section that would be widely used. This is to do with service by post. Where any, this is section 27, where any act or regulation authorizes or requires any document to be served by post, whether the expression give or send or any other expression is used, then unless a different intention appears, the service shall be deemed to be effective by properly addressing, prepaying, and posting by registered post a letter containing the document, and unless the contrary is proved to have been effective at the time at which the letter would be delivered in the ordinary course of post. What does this mean? That if a service has to be done and that is required to be served by post, then when do we say that the service has been done? The service has been done when it would have been delivered in the ordinary course of post. So delivery becomes very important. It is not that when you simply put it for delivery, it should have been delivered in the ordinary course of post by way of a registered letter, registered post. And of course, the condition is that the address should be proper. It should have been prepaid the way it should be, whatever as for postal charges. That is, and it is not necessary that the act which requires, or the statute which requires such an act to be done of serving by post uses the expression give or send. It can be any other expression. Very, very important. As young lawyers, for the newly passed out lawyers, this will be very important, because you will have to file affidavits of service. You will have to prove service in courts of law before you can actually get on to arguing the matter substantially, because procedure is also very important. So this will be of great assistance. This section would be of great assistance to you. And even in the problem that is at hand, you may try to use this section, though it has not been quoted there. But section 27, according to me, would also be something which you could delve into. Then we come to section 28. It refers to citation of enactments, how enactments are to be cited. They are to be cited with reference to the title, short title, or number and year. So we'll say Amending Act 37 of 1988. So that is how you identify an act. Any provision in an enactment to be cited by reference to a section or subsection. So how do you cite a provision in an enactment? By reference to a section or subsection. A question would arise whether we can refer to chapter, but that's not what is addressed in the General Clauses Act. Saving for previous enactments, rules and bylaws, section 29. Also, just imagine, even the act which is providing for saving and repeal of other enactment has to provide for the same for itself also. So application of the act to ordinances, section 30. With the exception of section 5, certain clauses of section 3 and 25, all provisions of this act would apply inter alia to ordinances promulgated by the President under the Constitution of India. So that is the General Clauses Act, 30 sections, and ending with how the ordinances need to be interpreted. And that ends our discussion on the overview or the salient features of the General Clauses Act. We throw the floor open to questions, or we can discuss our case study problem, which has been circulated. I request Dr. Yellagada to kindly come in and take this discussion forward.
Thank you, my lord, for your wonderful session. With your kind permission, I will again narrate the facts in brief for ready reference of the participants. This is a case of appeal which has to be filed in 2 months. The law says the appeal has to be filed within 2 months from the date of receipt of decision or order of the adjudicating authority relating to the service of tax, etc. So the point is, first question, it has more than one dimensions in this problem. It's not one dimension. So appeal has to be filed in 2 months. Here, the interpretation of the word month is involved. And in the facts of the case, what happened? It is appeal is to be filed in 2 months from the date of receipt of the order. In our case, the decision was given on 8th July and it was dispatched on 29th August. What is material for us is it is received. It was received by the appellant on 30th August. 30th August. And the appeal was sent by speed post and it was received by the appellate authority on 4th December. Two important dates. The date of impugned order is 30th August and the date on which the appeal filed was on 4th December. Now, the intervening facts are also important. 30th August is the date on which the appeal was received, and 30th November was Saturday, a public holiday. Remember, we have to calculate 2 months. 30th August was the date on which the appellant received. 30th November was the Saturday holiday, and next day, 1st December was Sunday, public holiday. On 2nd December, the appellant dispatched the appeal by speed post, and 3rd is a Tuesday, and the appeal was received on 4th December. I think facts are clear. It is interpretation of a month as well as filing of the appeal, and how to include or exclude the holidays and any other days. So I would like to invite any of the participants, if they have studied in advance or at least understood the problem right now, to come in and express their views whether the appeal which was received on 4th December is within the period of 2 months or not.
Dr. Yellagada, I would like to also add a bit that there is 1 month more available if you prove sufficient cause.
Condonation of delay, what we call as a, yes, my lord.
So the participants can also take advantage of that.
My lord, I will read that. That is also important. I won't speak much, but I will read it simply.
Yes, please.
I am reading that proviso. First, I will read the appeal proviso, time proviso. The appeal shall be presented within 2 months from the date of receipt of decision or order of the adjudicating authority relating to service tax, interest, penalty under this chapter. Now, proviso. Provided that the appellate authority may, if it is satisfied that the appellant was prevented by sufficient cause from presenting the appeal within the aforesaid period of 2 months, allow it to be presented within a further period of 1 month. I think I should not read it repeatedly. I would like the participants to gather it. Simply, I say that it empowered the appellate authority to accept the appeal even after that expiry of 2 months period, but if it is within 1 month further, subject to the satisfaction of sufficient cause. I am repeating, subject to the satisfaction of the sufficient cause. Thank you very much. Now open for the participants. Any participant, please raise your hand.
You may request any of the JMFCs to go ahead and deal with this problem.
Yes, Prashant Taide, please unmute and speak.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, please.
Sir, my question is that suppose one person is charged for publishing and transmitting obscene material in electronic form, which is punishable under section 292 of IPC, and the same offense, same act is also punishable under section 67 of IT Act 2008. So whether the person is tried under the IPC or under IT Act, please enlighten us on under purview of section 25 of General Clauses Act.
Mr. Taide, can you reserve this question? Can we reserve this question because we are discussing a case study? Can you throw some light on the case study, the facts which we have narrated now? Would you like to reflect on that?
No, sir.
No. Okay. So we will come it later on. Yes.
Okay,
From the batch. Yes, Mayur. Mayur, please unmute and speak.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, under section 10, there is one proviso they have added here.
Yeah.
Provided that nothing in this section shall apply to any act or proceeding to which Indian Limitation Act 1877 applies. Sir, and I think, sir, Section 4 of Limitation Act 1963, which says that if the court is closed on the last day, the court will reopen, then appeal may be accepted. And here, the period of already they have given 2 months, and it is of course discretion of the court to if that provided 1 month may be extended.
Yes. See, the law, as far as limitation is concerned, that if the statute itself provides for the limitation period,
Okay.
then Section 5 of the Limitation Act would stand excluded. That is how it is. And therefore, we have to come to the General Clauses Act. So then that section should not trouble you.
Oh.
Yes. We are expecting your inputs on the problem question that has been sent to you. How you would like to use the General Clauses Act sections. And they have also been provided to you to solve this problem.
Yeah. Thora sir, can you invite the person who has raised the hand?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Vijaya, please unmute and speak.
Please come in, Vijaya.
Yes,
Vijaya
sir. Good
Katkar.
afternoon, everyone.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. With respect to the problem in hand, as just now mentioned by Honorable Justice Ahuja, sir, that there is a specific provision with respect to the presentation of the appeal given in the problem itself, legal provision for filing of appeal, which says that an appeal shall be presented within 2 months from the date of receipt of the order or decision of the adjudicating authority relating to service, tax, interest, or penalty under this chapter. And if the same is applied to the dates which is given above, then the order which was received by the appellant was on 30th August 2019. And in then calculating 2 months from 30th August, it would be 30th of September, and then 30th September and October. But he has dispatched the appeal to appellate authority on 2nd December. Means there has been delay of around 1 month and some days, and there is no specific reason which is given in the problem, like why there has been delay in presentation of appeal or dispatch of the appeal to the appellate authority by speed post. So as per my opinion, since there has been no sufficient reason, the appellate authority has rejected the appeal as time barred is proper.
Okay, so you're saying it is time barred. All right.
Yes.
Yes.
Because
Jitesh,
of the limitation. Sorry.
Yes, we have others also, my lord,
Now,
ready to.
Dr. Yalagada, this person, Vijaya, who was that? She's a judge or
Vijaya Katkar, JMFC, sir.
she's a JMFC? All right. So she's thinking like a judge. Good.
yes, Jitesh, please unmute and speak.
Actually, sir, the date which has been the authority has given the
Please-
order is on
please-
8th of July.
Sir, please give a little introduction.
Okay, I am just have graduated from college and I have just become an advocate.
Name, please, full name.
My name is Advocate Jitesh Varsne.
Yes, please go
Okay,
ahead.
first of all, the order was given on 8/7/2019, dated order of adjudication authority. The order was been typed and sent on 29/8/2019 in August, and the order was been received by the appellant on 30/8/2019. According to the rule, there was a 2 months time. So on the 30/11/2019, the date was getting over, but it was a non-working day, a public holiday, and second, on 1st 12 2019 there was a Sunday public holiday. Okay, actually, the section 9 clause 1 says that we have to give a sufficient time to the applicant for appeal, and section 10 give a time for where there is a what we say where there is a holiday or something by the declared by the court, or it is a public holiday, so it can be extended 1 day. As soon as the court get open, he has to file the case, or he has to send it by post.
So what is your view?
It will be allowed it.
Because you're a lawyer, you think like that. But both of you have missed
Because
one
sir,
point.
actually, sir, because it is because on 30/11 it was a last date, but it was a holiday, due to which under section 10 it's give a permission that you can file on the next date whenever the court is getting open.
Did you actually check whether 30/11 was a non-working Saturday? It
So,
may
but
have-
it is given in the case law, no? Sir?
All right. All right. All right. All right. Very nice. No, what you both have missed is one thing, that the 2-month period got over on 31st of October.
30th.
31st of October. And then on 30/11, there is that 1 month extra period. Do you appreciate that? From 30th of August to 30th of November are 3 months. Because we are on 30th of November, that is the last working day. Now, just to clarify for all of you, there is a decision of the Supreme Court, which I think just sent to Dr. Yarlagada. This is Justice Ravindran's decision in the state of Himachal Pradesh versus Himachal Techno Engineers, where this whole discussion has taken place, how the month has to be seen. Dr. Yarlagada,
Sir.
if you have received it, or maybe we could just share this portion. Can you share this para 3 for everyone?
I will arrange for sir.
Para 3, can you share it here? Okay. There is a paragraph 3 from your mobile. Can you just put it on the screen? We'll just do it in a moment, because it's very interesting how the Supreme Court has discussed how a month needs to be calculated from month to month and not days.
Just 1 minute, my lord. I will send it.
I was hoping to have a more detailed discussion on the dates, because that was the whole question that was lingering. And but still, it's a nice effort.
Sir, I think there is one more person who wanted to express the view.
Yes, of course, we'll go ahead before we
Yes.
do that.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah. Meanwhile, Thoras sir, I sent you this on WhatsApp. Kindly show it on the screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Invite the next person, please.
Mayur, please unmute and speak.
Mayur.
Okay. Sir, actually,
Mayur, can you give your introduction?
sir, my name is Mayur Yashwantarane. I'm JMFC now, selected as JMFC.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Sir, actually, on 30th August 2019, order received by the appellant. Okay, and 2 months expired. 2 month period they have given already. But in case of service tax, it may extend further 1 month for a period of 1 month.
Yes.
Okay, so 3 months. So 30th August. But sir, in section 9, commencement and termination of time,
Yes.
they have clearly said that if the word is they have given from, means
Yes.
from the date of receipt, we have
Yes.
to exclude that day,
So
right?
we have to exclude what date?
30th August.
Yes.
Okay, so it will now goes to one more day on 31st August. We can
Yes.
say
First
Yes.
September.
31st from 31st August 2019.
Yes.
So we can count 3 months. So August has already gone. Now
Yes.
September, October,
Yes.
November, 30th November, 30th November was a non-working Saturday. That was public holiday.
Yes.
1st December is already Sunday. That is also public holiday.
Yes.
2nd December is a Monday. Appellant
Yes.
dispatched the appeal to the appellant authority by the speed post. I think
Yes.
somewhere the section might be 27 of general clause maybe read together, and I think the sir it is appeal allowed, sir. Appeal should be allowed, I think, in this case.
But you have to explain how. As a JMFC, you will have to give reasons. You can't simply just write dates and say it. What is the reason? Because if it is done on the next working day, now next working day is 2nd of December. It is a Monday.
Yes,
and on that Monday, the appeal has only been dispatched. And if you read
Dispatched
the facts of the case, right on top there is a decision of the Supreme Court, which says the date of receipt. And if you say section 27 also, that is date of receipt. And even the decision of the Supreme Court
Dispatch.
that says date of receipt is the presentation of the appeal. So the receipt is on 4th. How would you explain that?
Oh, the appellant authority has stated the date of receipt of the appeal by the date of presentation of appeal.
See, we are courts of law. Of course, the higher courts are courts of justice also, and even the lower
Yes, sir.
courts are courts of justice. But your justice till the districts is
Thank
supposed
you.
to be as per the statute.
Para number 3. Yes, my lord. Now it is on the screen.
Now let's read this para 3 of the decision of the Supreme Court, where it has discussed this very how the month to month goes. Where is the thing? Just
A petition under section 34 of
Yes.
Arbitration and Conciliation Act was filed by the appellant on 11th March, challenging the arbitral award. The petition was
just to interject 1 minute, Dr. Yellagada.
yes, my
There is
lord.
a little difference between the legal provision here and the legal provision under the Arbitration Act, which is being referred to. There it was 2 months and 30 days. Here we have 2 months plus 1 month.
1 month, yes.
So that there was more confusion there. And therefore, just see what the Supreme Court has had to say. Please read.
The petition under section 34 of the Arbitration Act was filed by the appellant on 11th March 2008, challenging the arbitral award. The petition was accompanied by an application under section 34 subsection 3 of the Act for condonation of delay of 28 days in filing the petition. The respondent resisted the application, stating that the petition under section 34 was filed beyond the period of 3 months plus 30 days, as pointed by my lord. Therefore, it was liable to be rejected. The learned single judge of the High Court dismissed the application for condonation of delay and as a consequence dismissed the petition under section 34 of the Act. He held that the award was received in the office on 10th November 2000. Yes, 10th November 2007. The period of 3 months, that is 90 days, had to be reckoned from 11th November 2007 by excluding the date of receipt. That the said 3 months period ended on 9 February 2008. That even if the maximum additional period of 30 days was counted thereafter by calculating from 10 February 2008, the last date of limitation for filing the petition would have been 10th March 2008, and therefore the petition filed on 11th March was barred by limitation. He held that the court had power to condone the delay only to a maximum period of 90 days plus 30 days, and therefore the delay in filing the petition on 11 March would not be condoned. Feeling aggrieved, the applicant filed the appeal by special leave.
So these are the facts of the case. Now, what the Supreme Court held after considering all this is given in another paragraph as to how the dates have to be calculated. Now that is there in paragraph 9. Paragraph 9 can be put up on the screen.
थोड़ा सा पैरा नंबर 9.
Nine, 10, 11 and 12. 12 is where the question is answered. 12, 13 are the conclusions of the Supreme Court. We can start from 9.
Yes, madam. The High Court has held that 3 months mentioned in section 34(3) of the Act refers to a period of 90 days. This is erroneous. A month does not refer to a period of 30 days, but refers to the actual period of a calendar month. If the month is April, June, September or November, the period of month will be 30 days. If the month is January, March, May, July, August, October or November, the period of the month will be 31 days. If the month is February, the period will be 29 days or 28 days depending upon whether it is a leap year or not. Section 34(3) of the Act and the proviso thereto significantly do not express the periods of time mentioned therein in the same units.
Yeah, let me just stop here, Dr. Yalagada. Same units means it is 2 months and 30 days. So it is month and day. That is what it means.
Yes, my lord. Subsection 3 uses the word 3 months while prescribing the period of limitation, and the proviso uses the word 30 days while referring to the outer side limit of condonable delay. The legislature had the choice of describing the periods of time in the same units, that is to describe the periods as 3 months and 1 month respectively, or by describing the periods as 90 days and 30 days respectively. It did not do so. Therefore, the legislature did not intend that the period of 3 months used in subsection 3 to be equated to 90 days, nor intended that the period of 30 days to be taken as 1 month.
Now the real thing starts. Yes, section that is para 11.
Yes, Thora sir, can you raise it a little? Para number 11, section 3, subsection 35 of General Clauses Act defines a month as meaning a month reckoned according to the British calendar. In Dodds versus Walker, the House of Lords held that in calculating the period of a month or a specified number of months that had elapsed after the occurrence of the specified event, such as giving of notice, the general rule is that the period ends on the corresponding date in the appropriate subsequent month, irrespective of whether some months are longer than others. To the same effect is the decision of this court in Bibi Salma Khatun versus State of Bihar 2001 volume 7 SCC 197. Therefore, when the period prescribed is 3 months as contrasted from 90 days from a specified date, the said period would expire in the 3rd month on the date of corresponding to the date upon which the period starts. As a result, depending upon the month, it may mean 90 days or 91 days or 90 days, 92 days or even 89 days.
So that is what is section 335. So when it says month to month, it has to move to the next month. Now somebody may say that if it expires on the 30th of November and November does not, it will go from 31st of August. From 30th August is the date of receipt. 31st August is the date from which the counting will start of the limitation. So if it is 31st August, it will go to 31st of September. And then from 31st of September, 30th of September, then it will go to 31st of November. Now, since November does not have 31 days, then it can go to 1st of December. My question is, would that logic really work? Dr.
Yes.
Yarlagadda?
Yes, Vijaya and Mayur, you can again reflect.
It is something to be thought about. And also, what would be the final verdict in this case?
Can I ask to turn it to the last page, my lord?
Yes, of course, you could read the last part. These are matters, Dr. Yarlagadda, which participants have to think about. This discussion may end in about some time now, but as lawyers, as judges, this will continue to dwell in our minds, because these are issues, these are vexed issues, how to calculate. What is the date from which we need to calculate? Whether between the period of expiration of the limitation and the 30-day period or 1 month period given, can it be said that when the 2-month period ends, that date is excluded, and for the balance period of 1 month, again 1 more day, we have to move to the next date? That also needs to be considered, because once you read paragraph 12, that will start tickling your brain. Yes, paragraph 12.
As the award was received by the executive engineer on 12th November 2007, for the purpose of calculating the 3 months period, the said date shall have to be excluded, having regard to section 12, subsection 1 of the Limitation Act 1963 and section 9 of the General Clauses Act. Consequently, the 3 months should be calculated from 13/11/2007 and would expire on 12 February 2008. 30 days from 12 February 2008 under the proviso should be calculated from 13/2/2008, and having regard to the number of days in February would expire on 13/3/2008. Therefore, the petition filed on 11/3/2008 was well in time and was not barred by limitation.
That is how the Supreme Court has read.
Yes.
Yes, any more thoughts?
My lord, this kind of problem usually may not be regularly come. It comes especially in the Negotiable Instruments Act. I had this kind of problems when I was working as the City Civil Court judge in the appeals and the revisions in the NI Act matters. There this question comes frequently.
Yes, it actually comes in almost all appeal matters.
Yes, sir.
Wherever there is a time limit specified in any other law, any law for that matter, these issues will arise, and we will have to be very careful and cautious. Normally, courts till the district court don't have, you have a clause on sufficient cause. That discretion is there. But then beyond the period of limitation, if it is specified in a statute, we have a recent decision of the Supreme Court in the case of GlaxoSmithKline, where it says if the statute provides a period of limitation, then perhaps except the Supreme Court in section under Article 142, no other court would have power even under 226 to actually condone that. And even a High Court is bound to follow that statutory period if it is codified. If it simply said for sufficient cause can be delayed, but if there is a limitation of time there, even that can't be. So that is how GlaxoSmithKline has interpreted Limitation Act. So of course we are not on a presentation on Limitation Act, though because of the nature of the problem that discussion went on. But I think it was, according to me, it was quite a interesting discussion. We had both sides, one saying that it is time barred, the other saying that it is not. But I think all of us need to keep thinking about it. There is no one specific answer. There may be other assumptions. Yes, based on the problem at hand, it seems that it may be time barred, but then the lawyer may also be right if he's able to show that somehow or the other putting it in the post and the postal authority acting as an agent of the appellate authority, he may be right. So there is not one answer. There is no one answer right now, and that is why this has come up for discussion here. If there was one answer, possibly I would not have brought it out.
My lord, I would like to, with your kind permission, I would like to add one more general legal proposition.
Yes.
In the matter of condonation of delay, it is said that the delay up to the period of expiry of the limitation has to be explained, not beyond that.
Yes.
So here, what happened in our case, in fact, the appeal itself was filed beyond the limitation.
Yes.
And he was, probably the party will be trying to bank upon the discretion of the court.
Yes.
While explaining the delay occurred at the end of that discretionary period.
Yes. Yes, that is a point. That is a point. The problem perhaps could have had that he also had made an application for delay in the facts. And that is assumed. That assumption should have been there.
Yes.
But I think it's an interesting discussion on this point, because these are vexed issues on how to count. But the General Clauses Act is actually, what shall I say, it's like a saving grace, because it helps you understand when it will stop and when it will continue.
My lord, take on. I think somebody has raised the hand.
Yes.
Toras sir, can you please invite?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Shivaji Patil, please unmute and speak.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we are here.
Sir, as far as present problem is concerned, Your Honor has said whether when the limitation period expires on 30th October, whether one day can be counted in the next month. My answer is, sir, the 1 day in next month cannot be counted. The limitation will expire on 30th November.
You're talking about November, 30th November.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Then there is a 1 month period of condonation of delay, and so the delay will be 31st December. Up to
Shivaji Patil, can you please give your introduction?
Sorry, sir. I am Shivaji Patil, selected as a judge, sir, in the recent list.
Yes. So what you are referring to, Mr. Patil, what you are referring to is 30th of November, and you are saying 30th of November because November doesn't have more than 30 days. Therefore, it cannot be said that it can go to first because we are counting a month. You are right. You are right. Absolutely right. So 1st December, can it go to 1st December?
No, sir. No, we cannot go to first.
In the hypothetical facts, 1st December is a Sunday and 2nd December is a working day.
Yeah, on the working day,
holiday, then you can always put it on the next working day, and General Clauses Act comes into force or comes into play then.
Yes,
two
sir.
More participants are there.
2 days
Yes.
delay is there, which
Yes, sir.
cannot be condoned in my view, sir.
So that you are also considering that the date of presentation is the date of receipt.
Date of receipt of the appeal to the court on 4th December.
Yes.
4th December.
So that is the
However,
present.
the appeal must
Yes.
presentation. Yes.
Yes.
So there is 2 days delay in filing.
As we said, it is arguable case, but you're also right.
Can we invite the other 2 speakers also?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Vijay, please unmute and speak. Vijay Katkar, madam,
Sir.
please unmute and
Yes,
speak.
sir. Good morning. Good afternoon once again.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I was going on the same line of discussion which my learned friend Shivaji sir had right now, with slight correction. Considering that the limitation starts running from 30th August 2019, so we have to count from 31st August 2019, and counting a month, not the number of the days. So the next limitation, the next month is September, so it is of 30 days, and then next is October, it is 31st, it is contained 31st, 31 days. So on 31st October, the 2 months limitation expires, and then there is an additional 1 month period which has been allowed as per the problem and the legal provisions for filing of appeals. But of course, there is a proviso with attached to that additional 1 month period. If the appellant was prevented by sufficient cause from presenting the appeal. So, assuming that the appellant is satisfying that cause or is presenting the sufficient cause, then that 1 month period, which then extends to 30th November, can be allowed. And then on 30th November would be included. So the limitation stops or expires on 30th November, since it is a month consisting of 30 days. And then first, in the problem, the 1st December and 2nd December, 1st December is a Sunday, 30th November is a non-working Saturday. So the limitation now shifts to 2nd December. That is a Monday. Applying the provisions of the General Causes Act, which we discussed during the discussion, that if a limitation falls on a day when the court is not working, so court would not be working on a non-working Saturday and a Sunday. So limitation now shifts on 2nd December, and then the limitation stops there. But it has been held by the appellate authority that the date of receipt of the appeal by speed post would be the date of presentation of appeal. So 2nd December was the date when the appellant dispatched the appeal, and 4th December is the date when the appeal was received by the appellate authority. So the final date is 4th December. So see, again there is a delay of 2 days, that is 3rd December and 4th December. So as per my opinion, the appellant or the person who is presenting the appeal has to give 2 reasons, or he has to show twice sufficient cause as to first why he has not presented the appeal within the 2 months, and then why he should be allowed to be presented within a further period of 1 month, and then he has to explain this delay of the 3rd December and the 4th December also. That is what I understood and I wanted to present. Thank you so much.
Very good. Excellent. Very nice.
One more
You
participant.
have a very nice judge with you, Dr. Yarlagada.
Thank you, my lord. We have one more participant.
Very good.
Yes, Aisha, please unmute and speak. Aisha.
Aisha, please, your introduction first. Please introduce yourself, Aisha.
Myself, Aisha Pirzadeh. I was in recommended list of JMFC, madam.
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. According to the problem, the order was received at 30th of August, and from then we have to calculate 2 months. That is 30th of September and then 30th of September and then November. And the limitation ends at 30th of November. So it cannot be extended just because it is a non-working day, and 1/12 means 1 December is Sunday, and so the limitation was extended up to the 2 of December. So the last day of the filing of appeal is, from my opinion, it is December 2. So, but that day he has dispatched the appeal and the appeal is not received by the appellant court. So there is again 2 days of delay. So in my opinion, it is a delay for 2 days and he have to explain the delay which has to be started from 30 after 30 September. So 1 month delay and then again two days of delay. And then the day at which the limitation ends 2 December. So he need to explain these all delay for delay continuation, my lordship. I understood after you refer us the
Very
judgment of
good, very good. I think that's good. That's the power of logical judicial thinking. So good, very
Thank you,
good.
my lordship.
Yes, Dr. Erlagada.
I think hands raised are almost down. But
Yes,
with
sir.
your kind permission, I would like to uh, reflect on an IT aspect here for our calculation.
Yes.
My lord, you are aware that this IBM has almost kicked most of the advocates in foreign country, but we are yet to reach that stage. But we have a website that is timeanddate.com, timeanddate.com, and it provides the calculation in months as well as days. So I was just counter checking. I have already calculated from this problem. First, I put the 2 months from the date of that 30th, 31st. Then it gave me the date of 30th October. And then I put 1 month again. And it brought me to 30th November, obviously. But that is one thing. So this website is also there for our help sometimes. But here,
No, but our General Clauses Act
sir,
to be
here
referred
starts.
to, and not the website.
Sir,
These are all,
here,
Dr. Erlagada, this is my belief that technology is a tool.
Sir.
That's all. Use it as a tool. It cannot be the decision maker for you.
My lord, here comes the calculation of the General Clauses Act. That is what we were discussing.
Yes.
That 30th November is said to be a Saturday public holiday. It is not. It is again. It leads some elaboration. It was holiday for the court, may not be a holiday for the post office or for the speed post for dispatching.
I'm not sure that it was even a holiday for the court, or maybe it was a Diwali vacation. That is not. That is just a hypothetical situation.
Okay, sir. Okay.
No, it's not real. Don't take it as real. And if somebody has found out that it was actually a working Saturday, I would give that person 100 marks, because then that person is really has a keen eye. Okay, I don't think anybody has pointed out, but to my understanding, it is not a red Saturday. It was it was a court working Saturday. But you are right that post offices were working. But if post offices are working, then if the rules of filing an appeal provide that the post office can be an agent of the appellate authority, then it is something else. Then filing, then second may be perfect based on these facts. So that we have to somehow, that is what I said, this is a brainstorming session. These problems are meant to actually activate your brain in the direction in which we have had this morning's discussion. And coming back to that date and time calculator, we'll come back to the GS Chhata Rice Mills case by the Supreme Court, which we just had to, disconnect for a while. Now here, as we had discussed, that in view of the Pulwama attack, which took place on 14 February, the Government of India issued a notification on 16 February under the Customs Tariff Act that all goods which are originating from the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, there would be a duty of 200% on that import. The precise time on which the notification was uploaded in the e-Gazette was 2000 hours, 46 minutes and 58 seconds. Now, where do we get that from? We get it from the digital signature, which is born on the uploaded notification. So we will always have to be mindful of the fact that today the notifications and everything are uploaded on websites and they have digital signatures. They are written very, very fine print. We actually need a magnifying glass to see this whole thing, 100 hours, 46 minutes and 58 seconds. So the customs authorities at the land customs station in Attari border, they sought to enforce the enhanced rate of duty to importers who had already presented the bills for home consumption. So when you're coming in from the day onwards, they did not wait till the uploading time. They said, okay, everything that has come on that day of 16th, we will start charging them 200%. And that was the whole discussion. So it was challenged in Punjab and Haryana High Court, and Punjab and Haryana High Court said, no, it is the time of the notification that is important. And therefore, they did not allow the authorities to charge 200%. Then they moved the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, that is where the Supreme Court held that this is an era of electronic publication. And in this digital era, the exact timing is very important. And therefore, they said, it held that in the era of electronic publication of gazette notifications and electronic filing of bills of entry, the revised rate under the notification applies to bills of entry presented for home consumption after the notification was uploaded in the e-gazette at 46.58 hours on 16th February. Not since morning, but at 8 o'clock, 8:46 and 58 seconds. So that is how, and the Supreme Court said, because this notification is neither a central act nor a regulation, the General Clauses Act will not apply. And that's where this came in. So we also have gone beyond the General Clauses Act, but nevertheless, the whole discussion in that decision also dwelt around the General Clauses Act. So that was the little discussion on the GS Chhata rice mills and the e-gazette notifications. Thank you very much. It was a lovely session. I personally had. I hope you all too enjoyed the session.
My Lord, with your kind permission, before winding up the session, I would like to render the vote of thanks. My Lord, within a short time, Your Honor has prepared such a very, very mind-triggering PPT along with the sections, along with the history. And Your Honor's session has helped kindle renewed enthusiasm for the profession of the young lawyers. And it brought new insights for all the participants, and it triggered new ideas to understand the laws, sections from the technical point of view, as well as from the judicial point of view as a human being. And most importantly, my Lord, Your Honor's style and the substance of this delivering the session has been very useful and very easily understandable. And my Lord, I'm very, very grateful on behalf of the Academy as well as the participants to Your Honor for giving your valuable time and sharing your Honor's knowledge and wisdom with all amongst us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
I am thankful to all the participants, the budding lawyers, and my brother and sister judges, especially the young judges and the would-be judges. Honorable Lordship has already given the appreciation to the participants. I compliment them, and on behalf of the Academy, I thank you all the participants and all your supporting staff members who have facilitated all these today's session. And I thank our Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Chief Justice Sri Deepankar Datta sir, and our Honorable Director, Honorable Chief Justice R.D. Dhanuka sir, for facilitating and allowing us these kind of sessions. Once again, I thank to Your Honor, and with your kind permission, I say that this is concluded.
Thank
we
you.
Will say, with a hope, with a belief again, we will meet again, if possible physically or at least on virtually.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks to all participants. We will have a session at 2 o'clock on the juvenile law. So please come back at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.